The morning sun cast amber light through the dusty window of the stagecoach as Adelaide Vaughn pressed her forehead against the glass, watching the endless expanse of Montana Territory roll past in waves of golden grassland. She had left everything behind in Philadelphia, fleeing a life that had never quite fit, seeking something she could not name in a place she had never seen. And now, as the coach rattled toward Hecla, she wondered if running away had been the greatest mistake of her life. The advertisement had been simple enough. School teacher needed in Hecla, Montana Territory. Room and board provided. Reply immediately. Adelaide had replied within the hour, her hands shaking as she sealed the envelope. And 3 weeks later, she held a one-way ticket west and a contract for 1 year of teaching. 1 year, she had told herself, just long enough to earn money for passage to San Francisco, maybe even to earn enough to start fresh somewhere civilized. Hecla would be temporary, a stepping stone, nothing more. The stagecoach lurched over a deep rut, throwing Adelaide against the worn leather seat. The only other passenger, an older woman with silver hair tucked beneath a faded bonnet, gave her a sympathetic smile. First time in Montana Territory. Yes, madam, Adelaide said, straightening her traveling dress, which had accumulated a week's worth of trail dust despite her best efforts. Hecla is a good town, the woman said. Small but honest folk, you will find your way there. Adelaide nodded politely, though she had no intention of finding her way anywhere permanent. She was 22 years old, educated at a proper finishing school, fluent in French and adequate in German, skilled in watercolors and piano, and entirely unsuited for frontier life. But circumstances had forced her hand, and here she was, rattling toward a town that probably did not even have a decent bookshop. The stagecoach pulled into Hecla just past noon, and Adelaide's first impression was of unrelenting dust and buildings that seemed to be holding themselves upright through sheer stubbornness. Main Street stretched perhaps 3 blocks, lined with false-fronted structures that proclaimed themselves a general store, a saloon, a bank hardly bigger than a shed, and what appeared to be a boarding house with faded paint peeling from its sign. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still touched with snow despite the June warmth, and the whole town seemed caught between the grandeur of the landscape and the harsh reality of survival. Adelaide stepped down from the coach, her legs unsteady after hours of travel, and immediately a man approached. He was perhaps 50, with graying hair and a marshal's badge pinned to his vest. Miss Vaughn, I am Marshal Garrett. Welcome to Hecla. Mrs. Thornton sent me to meet you. Thank you, Marshal, Adelaide said, accepting his offered hand. I appreciate the welcome. Town's grateful you came. Last teacher left after 2 months, could not handle the isolation. He picked up her trunk with surprising ease. Mrs. Thornton runs the boarding house. She will get you settled. School is not much to look at, but the children are eager to learn. As they walked down Main Street, Adelaide noticed people pausing in their work to stare. A woman sweeping the steps of the general store raised her hand in greeting. 2 men loading supplies onto a wagon tipped their hats. The attention made Adelaide's neck flush with heat, and she kept her eyes forward, trying to project confidence she did not feel. Mrs. Thornton proved to be a robust woman in her 40s with kind eyes and flour on her apron. Come in, come in. You must be exhausted. I have a room ready, and there is hot water if you want to wash. Supper is at 6, but I can bring you something now if you are hungry. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a dresser, a washstand, and a window overlooking what passed for Hecla's business district. Adelaide sank onto the bed, feeling the weight of the past weeks settle onto her shoulders. She had done it. She had actually fled across the country to a town barely marked on most maps. The adventure she had imagined on those restless Philadelphia nights now felt less romantic and more terrifying. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Vaughn, I have water for washing," Mrs. Thornton called. Adelaide opened the door, and Mrs. Thornton bustled in with a pitcher of steaming water. "I will let you rest. But before I go, I should mention that Yates Parker, who owns the ranch just outside town, will be by this evening. His daughter will be one of your students, and he wanted to introduce himself." "That is kind of him," Adelaide said, though the prospect of meeting a rancher made her stomach tighten with anxiety. Mrs. Thornton paused at the door. "Yates is a good man, lost his wife 3 years back to fever. He has been raising his daughter mostly on his own, though his ranch hands help when they can. He takes his responsibilities seriously, so do not be surprised if he seems a bit stern at first." After Mrs. Thornton left, Adelaide washed away the travel dust and changed into a fresh dress. This one a practical gray cotton that she hoped struck the right balance between respectability and frontier sensibility. She unpinned her dark brown hair, brushed it until it shone, then twisted it back into a neat bun at the nape of her neck. Looking in the small mirror above the washstand, she barely recognized herself. The woman staring back looked determined, even brave, though Adelaide felt neither. She spent the afternoon unpacking her trunk, arranging her few books on the dresser, hanging her 2 other dresses in the narrow wardrobe. Everything she owned fit into this small room with space to spare, and the realization made her feel untethered, as if she might blow away like tumbleweed. At 6 o'clock, Adelaide made her way downstairs to the dining room, where Mrs. Thornton had set a long table with mismatched plates and chairs. 4 other boarders were already seated, 2 prospectors still dusty from their claims, a bank clerk with ink-stained fingers, and a circuit preacher passing through on his way to butt. They all stood when Adelaide entered, and the preacher pulled out a chair for her. "Heard we had a new teacher," one of the prospectors said, his weathered face breaking into a gap-toothed smile. "That is good news for this town." Mrs. Thornton brought out platters of fried chicken, potatoes, green beans, and fresh bread, and the conversation flowed easily as they ate. Adelaide found herself relaxing slightly, answering questions about Philadelphia and her journey west, listening to stories about life in Montana Territory. The preacher spoke of towns he had visited, the prospectors shared tales of gold and silver strikes, and even the quiet bank clerk offered observations about the territorial government. They had just finished eating when the front door opened, and a man stepped inside, removing his hat as he entered. Adelaide's breath caught in her throat. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that filled the doorway. His hair was dark brown, almost black and slightly too long, curling at his collar. His face was tanned from sun and wind, with strong features and eyes the color of storm clouds. He wore work clothes, denim pants, and a shirt that had seen better days, but he carried himself with quiet confidence. "Yates," Mrs. Thornton said warmly. "Come in. This is Miss Adelaide Vaughn, our new teacher. Miss Vaughn, this is Yates Parker." Yates crossed the room, and Adelaide stood, suddenly very aware of how tall he was, how his presence seemed to fill the space. "Miss Vaughn," he said, his voice deep and roughened by years of shouting over wind and cattle. "Welcome to Hecla, Mr. Parker," Adelaide said, offering her hand. His grip was firm, his palm calloused, and the brief contact sent an unexpected warmth through her arm. "Mrs. Thornton mentioned you have a daughter who will be attending school. Emma. She is 8 years old and bright as a new penny. She has been after me for weeks about when the new teacher would arrive." His expression softened when he spoke of his daughter, and Adelaide caught a glimpse of tenderness beneath his stern exterior. "I wanted to meet you, make sure you knew that if you need anything at all, my ranch is just 2 miles south of town. We are always willing to help." "That is very kind of you, Mr. Parker. I am grateful." They stood there for a moment, and Adelaide felt something shift in the air between them, something she could not name. Yates's eyes held hers, and she saw intelligence there and weariness and something else that made her pulse quicken. "Well," he said finally, breaking the spell, "I should be going. Emma will want to know all about you, and I better have answers." He turned to Mrs. Thornton. "Thank you for supper last week. We still have not perfected our biscuits." Mrs. Thornton laughed. "You are welcome any time, you know that." Yates nodded to the other boarders, settled his hat back on his head, and left. Adelaide watched him go, aware that she was staring but unable to help herself. When she turned back to the table, she found Mrs. Thornton watching her with knowing eyes. "He is a good man," Mrs. Thornton said quietly. "Lost his wife to fever when Emma was just 5. He has been mother and father both to that girl, and he has done a fine job of it. The ranch keeps him busy, but he never misses church on Sunday, and he is always the first to help when someone needs it." Adelaide nodded, sitting back down, trying to ignore the way her heart was still racing. She had not come to Montana Territory to be distracted by handsome ranchers. She had come to earn money and leave, nothing more. The next morning, Marshal Garrett took Adelaide to see the schoolhouse. It sat at the far end of Main Street, a modest wooden building with a bell tower and windows that needed washing. Inside, there were 20 desks of varying sizes, a large slate board at the front, and a wood stove for winter. Books lined a shelf against one wall, their spines worn from use, and a globe sat on the teacher's desk, its paint faded but still intact. "We have about 18 students on the roster," Marshal Garrett said, "ages 6 to 15. Some of the older boys only come when ranch work allows, but they try. The town cares about education, Miss Vaughn. We want our children to have opportunities we did not have." Adelaide walked between the desks, running her hand along the scarred wood. She could picture children filling these seats, eager faces looking up at her, and despite her determination to remain detached, she felt a flutter of excitement. "When do I begin?" "Tomorrow, if you are ready. Word is already out that you are here. The children will show up at 8 o'clock sharp, I guarantee it." That afternoon, Adelaide prepared her lessons, reviewing the books available, planning reading exercises and arithmetic problems, thinking about how to engage students of such varying ages. The work consumed her, driving away thoughts of home, of the life she had left, of the uncertainty that lay ahead. The next morning, Adelaide arrived at the schoolhouse at 7:30 to find half a dozen children already waiting on the steps. They jumped up when they saw her, their faces bright with curiosity. A girl with blonde braids and a smattering of freckles stepped forward. "Miss Vaughn, I am Emma Parker. My pa said you were really pretty, and he was right." Adelaide felt her cheeks flush. "That is very kind of you, Emma. Should we go inside and get ready?" The children followed her in, chattering excitedly, and within 20 minutes, all 18 students had arrived. Adelaide called roll, learning names and faces, trying to match children with the families Mrs. Thornton had described. There were the Sanderson twins, whose father ran the general store, young Timothy Walsh, whose mother was the seamstress, the 3 Johnson boys, rough and tumble sons of prospectors, and Emma Parker, who sat in the front row, watching Adelaide with intelligent eyes the same gray color as her father's. Teaching proved more challenging than Adelaide had anticipated. The age range meant she had to teach multiple levels simultaneously. moving from primary reading with the youngest children to advanced arithmetic with the older students. But the children were eager and respectful, and Adelaide found herself enjoying the work more than she had expected. The hours flew by, and when she dismissed the students at 3 o'clock, she was exhausted but satisfied. Emma lingered after the others had left. "Miss Vaughn, my pa wanted me to ask if you would like to come to supper tomorrow evening. He wants to hear about school, and I want to show you my horse." Adelaide hesitated. Accepting dinner invitations from ranchers seemed unwise when she planned to leave in a year, but Emma's hopeful expression made refusal impossible. "I would be delighted, Emma. Thank you." Emma's face lit up. "I will tell Pa. He will be so happy." The next day passed in similar fashion, teaching lessons, managing the chaos of 18 students with different needs and abilities, and slowly finding her rhythm. Adelaide discovered that she liked teaching more than she had expected. The children's enthusiasm was infectious, and their progress, however small, filled her with pride. When school ended, Emma waited outside with a wagon. Sitting on the bench was Yates Parker, reins in hand. He climbed down when he saw Adelaide, his movements easy and confident. "Miss Vaughn, I hope you do not mind me fetching you. It is a bit of a ride to the ranch." "Not at all, Mr. Parker. I appreciate it." Adelaide accepted his hand to climb onto the wagon bench, very aware of the strength in his grip, the way his hand lingered perhaps a moment longer than necessary. Emma scrambled into the back, chattering about her day, about what the other children had done, about how Miss Vaughn was the best teacher Hecla had ever had. Yates listened with a smile, occasionally asking questions, and Adelaide found herself watching him, noting the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he laughed, the gentle patience in his voice when he spoke to his daughter. The Parker Ranch sprawled across a valley between two ridges, with a modest house, a large barn, corrals, and what appeared to be a bunkhouse for ranch hands. Cattle dotted the hillsides, and horses grazed in a nearby pasture. It was more prosperous than Adelaide had expected, evidence of hard work and careful management. "It is not much," Yates said, seeming almost embarrassed, "but it is home." "It is beautiful," Adelaide said honestly, taking in the mountains rising behind the ranch, the way the afternoon sun turned the grass to gold. "You have built something remarkable here." Something flickered in Yates's eyes, pleasure or perhaps surprise, and he looked away quickly. "My wife and I started this ranch 10 years ago. She loved this valley, said it was the most beautiful place on earth." Emma had already jumped down and was running toward the barn. "Come see Thunder, Miss Vaughn. He is my horse." The next hour passed in a blur of horses and cattle, Emma showing Adelaide around with boundless energy while Yates watched with quiet amusement. Thunder proved to be a gentle bay gelding who nuzzled Emma's pockets for treats, and Adelaide could not help but smile at the obvious affection between girl and horse. When they finally went inside, Adelaide found the house surprisingly comfortable. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a fireplace at one end and a large table near the stove. The furniture was simple but well made, and everything was clean and orderly. Evidence of Emma's presence filled the space. A rag doll on the sofa, drawings pinned to the wall, a slate with arithmetic problems worked out in careful script. "I hope you like venison," Yates said, moving to the stove where a pot simmered. "I am not much of a cook, but I can manage stew without burning the house down." "It smells wonderful," Adelaide said, and it did, rich and savory, filling the house with warmth. Emma set the table while Yates ladled stew into bowls, and Adelaide found herself drawn into the domestic routine, pouring water from a pitcher, slicing bread that one of the ranch hands had apparently baked. It felt comfortable and right in a way that made her chest ache with unexpected longing. Over dinner, they talked about school, about Emma's progress, about life in Hecla. Yates asked Adelaide about Philadelphia, and she found herself describing the crowded streets, the endless social obligations, the feeling of being trapped in a life that did not fit. She had not meant to reveal so much, but something about the quiet house and Yates's steady presence made her feel safe. "What made you leave?" Yates asked softly when Emma had gone to fetch her drawings to show Adelaide. Adelaide hesitated, then decided on honesty. "My father wanted me to marry a man twice my age because it would benefit his business interests. I could not do it, so I left." Yates's jaw tightened. "That was brave, or foolish. I am still deciding which." "Not foolish," Yates said firmly. "Never foolish to choose your own path." Emma returned with a sheaf of papers, and the moment passed, but Adelaide felt it settle between them, a shared understanding of what it meant to make difficult choices. As Yates drove Adelaide back to town that evening, the stars emerging in the darkening sky, Emma dozed in the back of the wagon. The silence was comfortable, broken only by the creak of wheels and the soft sound of the horses' hooves. "Thank you for coming," Yates said finally. "Emma has not stopped talking about you since school started. She loves learning, and I am grateful she has a teacher who cares." "Emma is a wonderful student," Adelaide said. "You should be proud." "I am." He paused. "I know you probably think we are all backwards out here compared to Philadelphia." "I do not think that at all," Adelaide said quickly. "You have built something real here. That takes courage and strength." Yates glanced at her, and even in the darkness, Adelaide could feel the weight of his gaze. "Most people from back east cannot wait to leave. They find Montana territory too rough, too isolated." "I am sure some do," Adelaide said carefully, not wanting to reveal her own plans to leave. "But not you." Adelaide did not answer immediately because she did not know what to say. She had been here less than a week, and already her certainty about leaving was beginning to crack. "I do not know yet," she said finally. "Ask me in a year." Something that might have been disappointment crossed Yates's face, but he just nodded. "Fair enough." The weeks that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Adelaide taught during the day, finding increasing satisfaction in her students' progress. Emma bloomed under Adelaide's attention, devouring books and begging for more challenging mathematics. The other children warmed to their new teacher, and even the older boys, who had been skeptical at first, began showing up more regularly. In the evenings, Adelaide often walked to the edge of town, watching the sun set over the mountains, trying to understand the strange tug she felt toward this place. She wrote letters to friends back in Philadelphia, describing the landscape and the people, but she found herself struggling to explain the feeling that was growing inside her, the sense that perhaps she had not been running away from something, but running towards something she had not known she needed. Yates began appearing in town more frequently, always with a plausible reason, needing supplies or discussing business with the bank. But somehow his errands always coincided with the end of the school day. He would tip his hat to Adelaide, exchange a few words, and leave, but those brief encounters left Adelaide's heart racing and her thoughts scattered for the rest of the evening. Mrs. Thornton noticed, of course. "He is sweet on you," she said one evening as they sat on the boarding house porch, watching the stars emerge. "We barely know each other," Adelaide protested, though her cheeks burned. "Does not take long when it is right," Mrs. Thornton said comfortably. "His wife was the same way. They met in Denver, and he knew within a week that she was the one. Married 3 months later, and they were happy right up until the fever took her." "I am not looking for a husband," Adelaide said firmly. "I plan to save money and move to San Francisco in a year." Mrs. Thornton just smiled. Plans change. As summer deepened, the landscape transformed, wildflowers blooming across the hillsides in riots of purple and gold. Adelaide found herself spending more time outdoors, taking long walks on Sunday afternoons, exploring the area around Hecla. The mountains called to her, their peaks snow-capped even in July, and she began to understand why people like Yates chose to build their lives here. One Saturday, in late July, Emma appeared at the boarding house with an invitation. "Pa is taking me on a picnic tomorrow after church, up to Miller's Creek. He said to ask if you would like to come." Adelaide knew she should say no. These outings were becoming too frequent, her feelings too complicated. But Emma's hopeful face and the thought of spending a day in the mountains with Yates made refusal impossible. "I would love to." Sunday morning, Adelaide dressed carefully in her simplest dress, a blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. She braided her hair to keep it manageable, pinned her bonnet securely, and tried to ignore the nervous flutter in her stomach. Church service was held in the same building as the school, with benches pushed together, and the circuit preacher delivering a sermon about patience and God's timing. Adelaide sat with Mrs. Thornton, acutely aware of Yates and Emma 3 rows ahead. Yates turned once, catching Adelaide's eye, and the small smile he gave her made her pulse quicken. After the service, Yates brought the wagon around, this time loaded with a large basket and fishing poles. Emma bounced with excitement as Adelaide climbed aboard, and within minutes they were heading out of town, following a narrow road that wound into the foothills. Miller's Creek proved to be a small, clear stream tumbling over smooth stones, surrounded by pine trees and open meadow. Yates pulled the wagon into the shade, and Emma immediately ran to the creek, peering into the water for fish. "She has been looking forward to this all week," Yates said, helping Adelaide down from the wagon. His hands on her waist sent warmth flooding through her body, and she stepped back quickly, trying to maintain composure. They spread a blanket near the creek, and Adelaide helped unpack the basket while Emma waded in the shallows. Mrs. Thornton had outdone herself, providing fried chicken, potato salad, fresh bread, preserves, and apple pie. "Did you cook this?" Adelaide asked, and Yates laughed, the sound rich and warm. "Not a chance. I asked Mrs. Thornton for help. I did not want to poison you with my cooking." They ate in comfortable silence, listening to Emma's delighted shrieks as she tried to catch minnows. The sun was warm, the air smelled of pine and wildflowers, and Adelaide felt something in her chest loosen and expand. "Thank you for coming," Yates said quietly. "Emma loves spending time with you, and I do too." Adelaide looked at him, startled by his directness. His gray eyes held hers, and she saw vulnerability there and hope, and something deeper that made her breath catch. "I enjoy spending time with you as well," she admitted. "But Yates, you know I am planning to leave in a year." "Plans can change," he said, echoing Mrs. Thornton's words. "I am not asking you to make any promises, Adelaide. I just want you to know that I care about you, more than I probably should, considering we have only known each other 2 months. Adelaide's heart hammered in her chest. "I care about you too," she whispered. "That is what frightens me." "Why does it frighten you?" "Because I never planned to stay here. I never planned to build a life in Montana territory. I was supposed to work, save money, and leave." Yates reached out, taking her hand in his. His palm was warm and calloused, his grip gentle but firm. "What if you found something worth staying for?" Before Adelaide could answer, Emma came running up, dripping wet and laughing. "Miss Vaughn, come see. There are fish everywhere." The moment broke, but as Adelaide followed Emma to the creek, she felt Yates's gaze on her back, felt the weight of his question settling into her heart. The rest of the afternoon passed in easy companionship. They fished, catching 3 small trout that Emma insisted on releasing back into the stream. They walked along the creek, Adelaide gathering wildflowers while Yates and Emma skipped stones across a deeper pool. Adelaide felt herself relaxing completely, laughing freely, allowing herself to simply be present instead of constantly thinking about the future. On the drive back to town, Emma fell asleep again, her head on Adelaide's shoulder. Yates drove with one hand, the other resting on the bench between them, close enough that Adelaide could feel its warmth. She wanted to reach out to lace her fingers through his, but she held back, still fighting the pull she felt toward this man and this life. "I meant what I said earlier," Yates said quietly, his voice barely audible over the rattle of the wagon. "I know you have plans and I respect that. But Adelaide, I have not felt this way since my wife died. I did not think I would feel this way again. If there is any chance you might stay, any chance at all, I need you to know that I am willing to wait, to give you time to figure out what you want." Adelaide's throat tightened with emotion. "You barely know me. I know enough. I know you are kind and patient with children who test every limit. I know you left everything behind rather than live a lie. I know you see beauty in this valley and peace in these mountains. I know that when you smile, it makes me believe in second chances." Tears pricked Adelaide's eyes. "Yates, I do not know if I can give you what you are hoping for." "Then just give me today," he said softly. "And tomorrow, and the day after that. That is all I am asking." Adelaide looked down at Emma, sleeping peacefully, her small hand curled around Adelaide's arm. She thought about the schoolhouse full of eager faces, about the mountains rising above Hecla, about the way her heart lifted every time Yates appeared in town. She thought about the life she had fled in Philadelphia, the suffocating expectations and empty social rituals, and she realized that, for the first time in her 22 years, she felt like she might be home. "All right," she whispered. "Today and tomorrow and the day after that." She felt rather than saw Yates's smile, felt the tension ease from his shoulders. His hand moved the few inches separating them, and this time, Adelaide did not pull away when his fingers closed gently around hers. As summer turned to autumn, Adelaide's relationship with Yates deepened. They were circumspect in town, mindful of propriety and Emma's feelings, but they found time to be together, stolen moments that Adelaide treasured. Yates would drive her home from school and they would take the long way, talking about everything and nothing, learning each other's dreams and fears. Adelaide discovered that Yates had wanted to be a teacher himself, before his father's death forced him to take over the family ranch. He read voraciously whenever time allowed, and his small collection of books revealed surprising depth. Shakespeare and Dickens, volumes of poetry, even some philosophy. They talked about books, comparing favorite passages, arguing good-naturedly about plots and characters. In turn, Adelaide told Yates about her childhood, about a mother who had died when Adelaide was 12, about a father who had never understood her desire for independence, about feeling like a stranger in her own life until she boarded the stage heading west. "You miss it?" Yates asked one evening as they sat on a fallen log overlooking his ranch, watching the sun set in brilliant orange and gold. "Philadelphia, the life you left behind." Adelaide considered the question carefully. "I miss some things. The theater, the museums, the libraries. But I do not miss the person I was there. I was playing a role trying to be what everyone expected. Here, I feel like I can breathe." "You can stay, you know," Yates said softly. "Make a life here. There are worse things than building something real in a place you love with people you care about." Adelaide looked at him, at the strong planes of his face gilded by sunset light, at the hope and patience in his gray eyes. Yates Parker, are you asking me to marry you? Not yet, he said with a slight smile. When I ask you that question, Adelaide Vaughn, I want to do it proper. But I am telling you that I love you. I know it has only been 4 months, and I know you had other plans, but I love you. I love your strength and your kindness, your intelligence and your laugh. I love the way Emma lights up when you are around, and the way you see beauty in things most people overlook. I love who you are, Adelaide, and I want the chance to love you for the rest of my life. Adelaide felt tears spill down her cheeks. I love you too, she whispered. I think I have loved you since you walked into Mrs. Thornton's boarding house that first night. I have been terrified to admit it because it means changing all my plans, but I do not care anymore. I love you, Yates Parker, and I want to build a life here. Yates pulled her close, and Adelaide went willingly, resting her head against his chest, feeling his heart beat strong and steady beneath her cheek. They sat there as the sky darkened and stars began to emerge, holding each other, and Adelaide felt peace settle over her like a benediction. 3 weeks later, on a crisp October morning, Yates drove Adelaide out to a meadow overlooking his ranch. The aspens had turned gold, their leaves shimmering in the breeze, and the mountains rose behind them in shades of purple and blue. Yates helped Adelaide down from the wagon, then took both her hands in his. Adelaide Vaughn, I have thought about this moment for weeks, trying to find the right words, but the truth is simple. I love you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep holding you every night. I want to build a life with you, raise Emma together, maybe have more children if we are blessed. I want to grow old with you in this valley, watching the seasons change, facing whatever comes together. Will you marry me? Yes, Adelaide said, her voice breaking with emotion. Yes, Yates, I will marry you. He pulled a ring from his pocket, a simple gold band with a small sapphire. It was my grandmother's. I know it is not fancy, but it is perfect, Adelaide breathed as he slipped it onto her finger. Everything is perfect. They were married 6 weeks later, in the schoolhouse decorated with late autumn wildflowers and pine boughs. Emma served as bridesmaid, wearing a new dress that Mrs. Thornton had sewn. The entire town attended, filling every bench and spilling out into the yard. The circuit preacher performed the ceremony, his voice booming as he pronounced them husband and wife. Adelaide wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit, the ivory silk shimmering in the afternoon light. When Yates lifted her veil and kissed her, the room erupted in cheers, and Adelaide felt joy burst through her chest like sunrise. The celebration lasted all afternoon and into the evening, with tables set up in the street, food brought by every family in town, fiddle music and dancing under the stars. Adelaide danced with Yates, with Marshall Garrett, with the bank clerk and the prospectors, with anyone who asked, laughing until her sides ached. As the evening grew late, Yates whisked Adelaide away, lifting her into the wagon despite her laughing protests. Emma had already been taken home by Mrs. Thornton, who had agreed to watch her for a few days while Yates and Adelaide settled into married life. The house was quiet when they arrived, lit by oil lamps that cast warm, golden light. Yates carried Adelaide over the threshold and she clung to his shoulders, feeling suddenly shy despite the love and desire coursing through her veins. "Are you nervous?" Yates asked softly, setting her down in the main room. "A little," Adelaide admitted, "but happy, so incredibly happy." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs stroking her cheeks. "We go at whatever pace feels right to you. There is no rush. We have the rest of our lives." Adelaide kissed him then, pouring all her love and trust and desire into the kiss, and Yates responded with gentle passion, his arms tightening around her. They made their way to his bedroom, their bedroom now, and Adelaide felt any lingering nervousness melt away in the warmth of Yates's touch. The whispered words of love and encouragement, the sure knowledge that this was right, that this was home. Later, wrapped in Yates's arms, listening to his steady breathing as he drifted toward sleep, Adelaide marveled at the path that had brought her here. 6 months ago, she had been running away, desperate and afraid, certain that Montana Territory would be a temporary stop on the way to somewhere else. Now she lay in the home she would help build, married to a man she loved more than she had thought possible, and she could not imagine wanting to be anywhere else. Winter came early to Montana Territory that year, snow blanketing the valley by mid-November. Adelaide discovered that ranch life was harder than she had anticipated, but also more rewarding. She learned to cook on the wood stove, mastering biscuits and stews and roasts. She learned to preserve vegetables, to churn butter, to mend clothes by lamplight in the evenings. She continued teaching, though the winter weather sometimes kept students home, and she loved the balance between her work in town and her life on the ranch. Emma thrived with Adelaide as her stepmother. The initial formality between them dissolved into easy affection, and within months, Emma was calling Adelaide Mama, the name slipping out naturally one evening at dinner. Adelaide had looked at Yates, tears in her eyes, and he had smiled and squeezed her hand. And Emma had looked worried until Adelaide pulled her close and told her that she would be honored to be called Mama. That winter tested them in ways Adelaide had not anticipated. A blizzard in January trapped them in the house for 5 days, supplies running low, the cold so intense that ice formed on the inside of the windows. Yates spent hours each day tending to the livestock, coming back with ice in his beard and exhaustion in his eyes. Adelaide kept the house warm, the food hot, Emma's lessons continuing despite the storm, and together they weathered it. In February, one of the ranch hands fell through creek ice and nearly died from the cold. Yates and Adelaide brought him to the house, warming him slowly, nursing him back to health over 2 weeks while his family in town worried. Adelaide sat up through nights, monitoring his fever, spooning broth into him when he could swallow. And when he finally recovered enough to return to the bunkhouse, his mother came to the ranch and hugged Adelaide so hard she could not breathe, thanking her over and over. "You belong here," Yates told Adelaide that night as they lay in bed, the wind howling outside. "The town has adopted you. They do not see you as a stranger anymore. You are one of us." Adelaide realized he was right. Somewhere between autumn and winter, between teaching lessons and nursing sick ranch hands, between learning to make biscuits and helping Emma with arithmetic, she had become part of Hecla. These people were her people now. This land was her land. This life was her life. Spring arrived suddenly, snow melting in rushing torrents, the valley transforming from white to green seemingly overnight. Wildflowers pushed through the mud, cattle moved to higher pastures, and Adelaide felt restlessness stir in her blood. One morning in April, she woke feeling strange, her stomach unsettled, her body tender in unfamiliar ways. Mrs. Thornton took one look at her during a visit to town and smiled knowingly. "You are with child." Adelaide stared at her, the words not quite registering. "What?" "I have birthed 6 of my own and helped deliver 24 others. I know the signs. You are maybe 2 months along, I would guess." Adelaide pressed a hand to her stomach, wonder and fear warring in her chest. A baby. She was going to have a baby. She and Yates were going to have a child together. That evening, she told Yates while they sat on the porch, watching Emma play with the dogs. His reaction was everything she could have hoped for, joy and awe and fierce protectiveness all flashing across his face at once. He pulled her close, his hand settling on her still flat stomach, and whispered, "Thank you. Thank you for giving me this, for giving us this." Emma was thrilled when they told her, immediately launching into plans for the baby, debating whether she wanted a brother or sister, talking about how she would teach the baby to ride and read and catch fish. Adelaide watched her stepdaughter with overflowing heart, grateful beyond words for this family she had found. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through spring and into summer. Adelaide's body changed, her belly swelling with life, and she marveled at the miracle growing inside her. She taught through June, finally stopping when the school year ended, though some of the older students begged her to continue summer lessons. Yates hovered, protective and attentive, helping with chores Adelaide could no longer manage, insisting she rest more than she wanted. It should have been suffocating, but instead it made Adelaide feel cherished, loved in ways she had never experienced. In late September, when the aspens were turning gold again, Adelaide's labor began. Mrs. Thornton and the town doctor came to the ranch, and Emma stayed with a neighbor family. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day, and Adelaide clung to Yates's hand, drawing strength from his presence. Finally, as afternoon light slanted through the bedroom window, Adelaide delivered a healthy baby boy. Yates cut the cord with shaking hands, and when the doctor placed the infant on Adelaide's chest, both parents wept with relief and joy. They named him Robert James Parker, after both their fathers, and he was perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, a shock of dark hair, and his father's gray eyes. Emma was smitten immediately, holding her baby brother with careful reverence, already planning all the things she would teach him. The first year of Robert's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and endless laundry, but also moments of pure magic. His first smile, directed at Adelaide at 2 months old. His first laugh, prompted by Emma making faces. His first word at 10 months, a garbled mama that made Adelaide cry. Yates was a devoted father, taking turns walking Robert through the nights when he was colicky, changing diapers without complaint, spending hours simply holding his son and marveling at the small miracle they had created. Adelaide returned to teaching when Robert was 6 months old, bringing him to school in a basket near her desk. The students were delighted, taking turns holding him during lunch, and Robert grew up surrounded by books and learning, watched over by 24 protective older siblings. 2 years after Robert's birth, Adelaide found herself pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier, her body knowing what to expect, and in the spring of 1882, she delivered a daughter they named Clara Marie. Clara had Adelaide's dark hair and delicate features, but Yates's determined personality, and from the moment she could crawl, she was into everything. Emma was 13 by then, poised on the edge of young womanhood, and she doted on her younger siblings with the perfect mix of affection and exasperation. Adelaide watched her stepdaughter grow, helped her navigate the complicated waters of adolescence, and felt profound gratitude that she had been given the chance to be Emma's mother. The ranch prospered under Yates's careful management. He expanded the herd, bought additional land, built a new barn, and enlarged the house to accommodate their growing family. Adelaide continued teaching, though she reduced her hours to care for the children, and the school thrived, eventually requiring a second teacher to handle the influx of students as Hecla grew. The years flowed past in a rhythm of seasons and cycles, planting and harvest, births and deaths, celebrations and challenges. They lost Yates's best horse to a rattlesnake bite the summer Clara turned 3. A wildfire threatened the ranch in the drought year of 1884, and the entire town turned out to help dig fire breaks and save the livestock. Emma graduated from Adelaide School and went to Denver for teacher training, returning 2 years later to teach alongside her stepmother. Through it all, Adelaide and Yates's love deepened and matured. The passion of their early days transformed into something richer and more complex. Partnership and friendship woven together with romance, shared history and inside jokes, the comfort of knowing another person completely and being known in return. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep, and they sat on the porch watching stars emerge over the mountains, Adelaide would think back to that terrified girl who had arrived in Hecla with one trunk and a 1-year plan. She barely recognized that person now. Adelaide had become someone stronger, someone rooted in this land and this life, someone who had found home not in a place but in the people she loved. "You ever regret it?" Yates asked one evening when Adelaide was lost in thought. "Staying here instead of going to San Francisco, seeing more of the world." Adelaide looked at him, at the face she loved more with each passing year, at the silver beginning to thread through his dark hair, at the lines around his eyes carved by sun and laughter. "Never," she said honestly. "I was looking for something all those years in Philadelphia, something I could not name. I thought it was adventure or freedom or independence. But it was home, it was you, it was this." She gestured at the valley spread before them, at the house where their children slept, at the life they had built together. "I was not running away when I came here, Yates. I was running toward you. I just did not know it yet." He pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "I love you, Adelaide Parker. I love you too." Robert appeared in the doorway, 6 years old and rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Mama, I had a bad dream." Adelaide opened her arms and he climbed into her lap, and Yates wrapped them both in his embrace. Clara's voice called from inside, "I want to come too." And within moments all 3 children had squeezed onto the porch swing with their parents, a tangle of arms and legs and love. This, Adelaide thought, holding her family close as the stars wheeled overhead. This was everything she had never known she wanted, everything she had been searching for without realizing it. She had thought she would work for a year and leave, but Hecla had become home, Yates had become her heart, and this life they had built together was better than any dream she could have imagined. The years continued their steady march. Emma married a young rancher from a neighboring spread, and Adelaide and Yates celebrated the wedding with joy tempered by the bittersweet knowledge that their oldest daughter was starting her own family. But Emma and her husband built their home close by, and soon Adelaide was a grandmother, holding Emma's newborn son with tears streaming down her face, the cycle of life continuing. Robert grew into a quiet, thoughtful boy who loved books as much as ranching, spending his days helping his father with livestock and his evenings reading by lamplight. He talked of going to college someday, maybe studying law or medicine, and Adelaide and Yates encouraged his dreams while hoping he would return to Montana Territory after his education. Clara was pure fire and determination, learning to ride before she could barely walk, climbing trees and catching snakes, and declaring she was going to be a rancher just like her father. She had Adelaide's intelligence and Yates's stubbornness, a combination that often left her parents exhausted but always proud. In the summer of 1889, when Adelaide was 36 and Yates was 42, they welcomed their 4th child, a surprise baby girl they named Catherine Rose. Catherine was born during a thunderstorm, arriving faster than the doctor could get to the ranch, delivered by Yates with Emma's help and Mrs. Thornton shouting instructions from the hallway. "I think we are done now," Adelaide said breathlessly as she held Catherine, and Yates laughed until he cried, agreeing wholeheartedly. But Catherine was a blessing, a sweet-tempered baby who seemed to bring joy wherever she went. Robert and Clara adored their youngest sister, and Adelaide found herself treasuring the late-in-life chance to mother an infant again, knowing this would be her last. The turn of the century found the Parker family thriving. Emma had 3 children. Robert was studying medicine in Denver with plans to return and serve rural Montana communities. Clara was running much of the ranch's day-to-day operations, despite being only 17. And Catherine was growing into a bright, curious girl who followed Adelaide everywhere. Hecla had grown too, expanding from a rough frontier town into a proper community with a new school building, a church, a newspaper, and even a library that Adelaide had helped establish. The wild edges had been tamed somewhat, though the mountains still loomed overhead, eternal and unchanging. Adelaide looked different now, her dark hair threaded with silver, fine lines around her eyes and mouth, her body softened by childbearing and age. But she felt more herself than she ever had, comfortable in her skin in a way she had not been in her youth. Yates had aged as well, his hair now more gray than dark, his face weathered by decades of sun and wind. But he still made Adelaide's heart skip when he smiled, still reached for her hand automatically, still kissed her every morning and every night as though it was a sacred ritual. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Yates surprised Adelaide with a trip to Denver. They left the younger children with Emma and traveled by train, Adelaide's first time riding the rails in Montana territory. Denver had grown into a real city, with paved streets and electric lights and theaters and restaurants, and Adelaide drank it all in with delight. But after a week, she found herself homesick for the valley, for the mountains, for the quiet rhythms of ranch life. They cut the trip short by 3 days, and when the train pulled into the station closest to Hecla and Adelaide saw the familiar landscape rolling past the windows, she felt her heart lift with something like relief. "Ready to go home?" Yates asked, watching her face. "More than ready," Adelaide said, squeezing his hand. "I love you for bringing me here, for showing me the city. But home is where we are going with our family. That is where I want to be." The ride from the station to the ranch was familiar and beloved, every hill and creek and stand of trees evoking memories. Adelaide thought about the young woman she had been, arriving in Hecla with such different expectations, and she sent a silent thank you to that woman for having the courage to step into the unknown. The house came into view, and Adelaide could see Clara waiting on the porch, waving frantically. Catherine burst out the door and ran toward the wagon, her braids flying, shouting, "Mama, Papa, you are home." Yates pulled the wagon to a stop and Adelaide climbed down, catching Catherine as the girl launched herself into her arms. Clara embraced them both, talking rapidly about everything that had happened during their absence, about a calf that had been born and a fence that needed mending, and how she had practiced the piano every day, just like Adelaide had asked. They walked into the house together, and Adelaide breathed in the familiar sense of home. Wood smoke and coffee, soap and leather, all the small domestic smells that meant family and belonging. The main room had been decorated with wildflowers, and a cake sat on the table with "Happy Anniversary" written in Clara's careful script. Emma and her family arrived within the hour, and they celebrated together. 4 generations gathered around the table, sharing food and stories and laughter. Adelaide looked around at the faces she loved, at the life she had built, and felt gratitude so intense it was almost painful. That evening, after everyone had left and the younger children were asleep, Adelaide and Yates sat on the porch as they had done thousands of times before. The mountains rose against the darkening sky, their peaks gilded by the last rays of sunset, and the valley below was peaceful and golden. 20 years, Yates said softly. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I walked into Mrs. Thornton's boarding house and saw you sitting there. Other times it feels like I have known you my entire life. Both are true, Adelaide said. Time is strange that way. Do you remember what you said that first night we went to Miller's Creek, when I asked you what you wanted? Adelaide thought back, smiling at the memory. I said I wanted today and tomorrow and the day after that. You have given me so much more than that, Yates said, his voice rough with emotion. You have given me a life I did not think I would have again. You have given me more children. You have been the mother Emma needed. You have made this house a home. You have been my partner and my love and my best friend. I do not have words for how grateful I am. Adelaide felt tears slip down her cheeks. I am the grateful one. You made me feel like I had finally come home. You gave me roots when I thought I only wanted wings. You showed me that staying can be just as brave as leaving, that building something lasting is its own kind of adventure. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge, and Adelaide marveled at the mysterious ways life unfolded. She had thought she would work in Hecla for a year and leave, but instead, she had found love and family and purpose. She had discovered that home was not a place you found, but something you built, day by day, choice by choice, with the people you loved. As the years continued to pass, Adelaide watched her children grow into adults with their own dreams and challenges. Robert returned from medical school and established a practice in Hecla, marrying a nurse he had met in Denver, and settling into a house just down the street from the original schoolhouse where Adelaide had taught. Clara ran the ranch with increasing confidence, eventually partnering with her father as an equal. And though she had suitors, she declared herself perfectly happy unmarried and focused on the land she loved. Catherine proved to be musically gifted, and Adelaide arranged for her youngest daughter to study piano in Denver during the winters, though Catherine always returned to the ranch for summers. Eventually, Catherine became a music teacher, splitting her time between Denver and Hecla, bringing culture and beauty to the rural community. Emma's family continued to grow, and Adelaide spent countless happy hours with her grandchildren, teaching them to read, telling them stories, watching them play in the same fields where their parents had played. The cycle of generations moving forward was both poignant and deeply satisfying. Yates and Adelaide grew older together, their bodies slowing but their love remaining constant. They took daily walks when weather permitted, shorter now but still meaningful, still filled with conversation and comfortable silence. They tended a garden together, preserving vegetables each autumn with the practiced ease of long habit. They sat on the porch every evening, watching the sun set over mountains that had witnessed their entire married life. On Adelaide's 50th birthday, the entire family gathered for a celebration that filled the ranch house and spilled out into the yard. Children and grandchildren, old friends from town, former students now grown with families of their own, all came to honor the woman who had arrived in Hecla planning to stay just 1 year, and instead had spent 3 decades building community and family. Marshall Garrett, now retired and white-haired, stood to give a toast. When Adelaide Vaughn stepped off the stagecoach 30 years ago, we knew we were getting a teacher. What we did not know was that we were gaining a neighbor who would nurse our sick, teach our children, stand with us through hard times, and show us all what it means to truly become part of a place. Adelaide, you thought you would work and leave, but instead you became the heart of this town. We are blessed to have you. Adelaide stood, overwhelmed by emotion, and Yates rose with her, his arm around her waist, steady and supportive as always. I came here running from something, she said, her voice strong despite tears. I thought Montana territory would be temporary, a stepping stone to somewhere else. But you all showed me that home is not about where you plan to be, but about where you are loved and needed and can love in return. Yates made me feel like I had finally come home, and you all have given me a life richer than any I could have imagined. Thank you for accepting the scared girl who arrived here and helping her become the woman standing before you now. The party continued long into the evening, with music and dancing and storytelling. Adelaide danced with Yates, with her sons and sons-in-law, with grandsons now tall enough to reach her shoulders. She watched her family with eyes that saw not just the present but the past as well, the scared young woman she had been, and the path that had led her here. As the celebration wound down and people began to leave, Catherine sat at the piano and played a song she had composed for her mother, a beautiful melody that somehow captured the sweep of Montana landscape and the warmth of home. Adelaide listened with closed eyes, letting the music wash over her, feeling profoundly grateful for every choice that had led her to this moment. That night, lying in bed beside Yates, his breathing deep and even as he slept, Adelaide thought about the girl she had been in Philadelphia, suffocating under expectations and conventions. That girl had been brave enough to run, but not yet brave enough to stay. It had taken coming to Montana, meeting Yates, building a life in Hecla, to learn that real courage was not about movement but about commitment. Not about keeping options open but about choosing and then choosing again every day, to love and build and stay. The seasons continued their eternal rotation. Springs brought wildflowers and calving season, summers brought long days and the work of haying, autumns brought golden aspens and preparation for winter, and winters brought snow and stillness and the deep satisfaction of a year completed. Adelaide and Yates moved through these rhythms together, their lives woven so tightly together that it was impossible to say where one ended and the other began. When Adelaide was 55 and Yates was 58, he had a health scare that reminded them both of mortality's presence. A bout of pneumonia left him weak for months, and Adelaide nursed him with fierce determination, sitting up through long nights, monitoring his fever, praying with an intensity she had not known she possessed. Robert, with his medical training, helped tremendously, but it was Adelaide's love and stubbornness that pulled Yates through when he finally recovered, thinner and weaker but alive. Yates held Adelaide close and said, "I am not ready to leave you yet. We have too many sunsets left to watch together." "Good," Adelaide said firmly, "because I need you here. We all need you here." The scare made them both acutely aware of time's passage, of the preciousness of each day. They began to slow down more deliberately, letting Clara and her husband take on more of the ranch work, spending more time with grandchildren, taking longer to savor simple pleasures, morning coffee on the porch, evening walks through the garden, reading aloud to each other by lamplight. Adelaide retired from teaching at 57, passing her classroom to a young teacher fresh from college. It was harder than she had anticipated, letting go of work that had defined so much of her life. But her body was tired, and she wanted time with Yates, time to enjoy the life they had built without the constant demands of lesson planning and grading papers. In retirement, Adelaide discovered new pleasures. She gardened extensively, filling the yard with flowers that bloomed from spring through autumn. She wrote long letters to former students scattered across Montana territory and beyond. She helped Catherine with her music students when they came to the ranch for summer lessons. She baked bread and pies, preserving old recipes and creating new ones. She sat with grandchildren, telling them stories about Philadelphia and the stagecoach journey west, and falling in love with their grandfather. Yates scaled back his ranch work as well, though he still rode out most days to check on cattle and fence lines, unable to fully let go of the land he had worked for so long. But he was home for supper every evening, and he and Adelaide fell into comfortable routines that had the feel of ritual. Coffee together at dawn, reading newspapers in the afternoon, porch sitting at sunset. Their 60th wedding anniversary approached in the autumn of 1909, when Adelaide was 64 and Yates was 67. The family planned a grand celebration, determined to honor a love that had endured for 3 decades. But 2 weeks before the celebration, Yates collapsed while out riding. Robert was there within minutes, but the stroke was severe. They brought Yates home, and Adelaide refused to leave his bedside. She held his hand, talked to him constantly, told him stories of their life together, reminded him of every moment they had shared. For 3 days, Yates drifted in and out of consciousness. In his lucid moments, he looked at Adelaide with such love that it broke her heart. "My girl," he whispered once. "My Adelaide, thank you for staying." "I will always stay," Adelaide said, tears streaming down her face. "Always, Yates. You are my home." On the 4th day, with autumn rain falling soft outside and the entire family gathered in the house, Yates squeezed Adelaide's hand once and slipped away peacefully. Adelaide felt the moment his spirit left, felt the loss like a physical blow, and the sound of her grief brought everyone running. The funeral was held in the Hecla church, which overflowed with people whose lives Yates had touched. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a view of the valley he had loved and the mountains he had gazed at all his life. Adelaide stood between Robert and Clara, Emma and Catherine on either side. Grandchildren clustered around, and she felt the support of family holding her upright when her own strength failed. The months after Yates's death were the hardest of Adelaide's life. She moved through days in a fog of grief, going through motions but feeling disconnected from the world. The house felt too empty, the bed too large, the silence too profound. She found herself talking to Yates constantly, telling him about her day, asking his opinion, expecting him to walk through the door any moment. But gradually, supported by children and grandchildren and the entire town of Hecla, Adelaide found her way back to life. The grief did not leave, but it transformed into something she could carry, an ache that was also a reminder of how deeply she had loved and been loved. She began to take walks again, visiting the places she and Yates had gone together, finding comfort in familiar landscapes. She spent time with grandchildren, discovering that their energy and joy could break through her sadness. She helped Catherine with music lessons, finding solace in beauty and creativity. She tended her garden, working the earth that Yates had loved, feeling close to him there. Robert worried that Adelaide would decline without Yates, but instead she surprised everyone by finding new strength. She was 70 years old when she began writing a memoir, wanting to preserve the story of her life for her grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She wrote about Philadelphia and the stagecoach journey west, about meeting Yates and falling in love, about building a family and a life in Montana. The writing became a way to process grief, to honor Yates's memory, to make sense of the unexpected path her life had taken. The memoir took 2 years to complete, and when it was finished, Adelaide had copies made for each of her children. Reading it together became a family tradition, the stories connecting generations, helping grandchildren and great-grandchildren understand the roots from which they had grown. Adelaide lived another 15 years after Yates's death, growing old with grace and dignity. Her mind remained sharp, her spirit undimmed even as her body weakened. She died peacefully in her sleep at age 85, in the house she and Yates had built, surrounded by the love of 4 generations of family. They buried her next to Yates on the hill overlooking the ranch, and the entire town turned out for the funeral. Former students, now old themselves, spoke of lessons learned. Grandchildren and great-grandchildren shared memories. The preacher talked about a woman who had thought she would work and leave, but instead had found home. A woman whose love and commitment had helped build not just a family, but an entire community. Adelaide's legacy lived on in countless ways. The Parker Ranch continued to thrive under Clara's management, eventually passing to Adelaide's grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Robert's medical practice served rural Montana for 4 decades, and his children followed him into medicine. Catherine's music students went on to teach others, spreading beauty and culture through the region. Emma's descendants filled the valley, ranchers and teachers and doctors and musicians, all carrying forward the values Adelaide and Yates had instilled. The schoolhouse, where Adelaide had taught for over 30 years, was eventually replaced by a larger building, but they named it Adelaide Parker Elementary School in her honor. Her memoir was published by a small Montana press and became required reading for state history classes, a first-hand account of frontier life and the transformation of the West. But perhaps Adelaide's greatest legacy was the simple truth she had discovered and lived. That home is not a place you find, but something you build, day by day, choice by choice, with the people you love. She had come to Montana territory planning to stay 1 year, running from a life that did not fit, seeking something she could not name. Instead, she had found Yates Parker, a cowboy rancher with gray eyes and a gentle heart who had made her feel like she had finally come home. In the years after her death, when grandchildren and great-grandchildren gathered on the ranch for reunions and celebrations, they would walk up the hill to where Adelaide and Yates were buried together. The view from that spot was breathtaking, encompassing the valley and the mountains, the ranch and the distant town of Hecla. Standing there, looking out over the landscape Adelaide had come to love, her descendants could almost hear her voice telling the story one more time. How she thought she would work and leave, but how a cowboy made her feel like she had finally come home, and how that feeling had transformed her entire life. The sun would set over those eternal mountains, painting the sky in brilliant colors, and the family would feel the presence of Adelaide and Yates in the wind and the landscape, in the very soil beneath their feet. The story of their love had become part of Montana itself, woven into the land and the community they had helped build, a testament to the power of choosing to stay, to build, to love with your whole heart, even when it means changing all your plans. And that story would continue to echo through generations, a reminder that sometimes the best adventures are not about leaving but about having the courage to stay, to plant roots, and to call a place and a person home.